now at question 82. And this again is on page 178. We're going to look at question 82. This is one where the signs don't always go back and forth. This one, we're going to have to factor it. We're going to have to get our critical points. We're going to have to check them. And this one's also going to give us, I believe, 3 critical points. So we've got 9x minus 8 over 4x squared plus 25, and that's going to be less than 0. So we are working with a rational inequality again. So we're going to have to first find the numbers not in the domain. And we'll just go ahead and factor that quickly here. Now, when I factor it, it's going to be easier normally to check in the factored version. What do we know about that denominator? Well, what do we know about 4 and the 25? Make sure I copied it down. Oh, it's not going to factor. Sorry about that. I would think it was a minus. If it was a minus, it would factor, right? But this is not going to factor. Sorry about that. I looked at it wrong there. So let's go back and look at that 82 again. Why make a mess here? And that is not going to factor. Why would it not factor? Down below. Well, when I have this, I have 4x squared plus 25. That is not going to factor, because if I look at what numbers are not in the domain, I've got 4x squared plus 25 equals 0. Why is that not going to factor? Now, if it was a negative, it would factor as a difference of squares, right? Because 4 is a square, 25 is a square. But what happens if I try to solve this? If I try to solve this, we're going to use the square root property. So I'm going to move that 25 over, and I'm going to divide by my 4. And then I've got x squared equals a minus 25 over 4. How do I get rid of a square? Square root. And what does that make it then? Plus or what? Minus. Now, remember back from 1-3. When I take the square root of a negative number, it comes out as what? Imaginary. So that's going to be 5 over 4i. Now, what does that tell you? We have an imaginary number, okay? That tells you then that there are no numbers that are not in the domain. Normally it would be like 5, or it would be 8, and that wouldn't work because that would give you division by 0. But no matter what number I plug in, I am never ever going to have division by 0. So we solved it out, we got to this point. So that tells you then, since it's complex, since it's non-real, you have no numbers that are not in the domain.
How do you have 5 over 4?
That should be 5 over 2 there, sorry about that, because square root of 4 is 2. So that tells you then that there are no numbers not in the domain. Because whenever you get imaginary, that means there's no number that will make it work. So we don't have to worry about that. Now, how do we finish it out? Well, what do we need to do? Once we found the number's not in the domain, and there are no numbers not in the domain, so every number will work, we can now find that by setting it equal to 0. And how can I quickly and easily solve this? I can quickly and easily solve it by simply cross multiplying here. And that gives you then 9x minus 8 equals 0. We're going to add that 8 over. And so 9x equals 8. Divide by 9. And we've got x equals 8/9. Now, we have no other things to worry about because we cannot plot this imaginary number on the number line. So the only part we have to worry about is that 8/9. And we've got to check both sides because it can be true on both sides, false on both sides, or flip back and forth. So we've got 8/9, so we need a number less than 8/9. So we're going to use, how about 0? Because 0 is less than 8/9. We can also use 1 because 1 is bigger than 8/9. And that makes my two regions. So this is what we've got so far here. Now we're going to check them, and we'll just check them back in the original. So we're going to check them in 9x minus 8 over 4x squared plus 25 is less than 0. So let's plug in our values. We're going to start by plugging in 0. And if I plug in 0, then I have 9 times 0 minus 8 over 4 times 0 squared plus 25. That goes away, that goes away. So what are we left with? We are left with 8 over 25. And is 8 over 25, is that less than 0? Is that true or is that false now? Is negative 8 over 25 less than 0? Yes, it is, right? So that would then be what? That would then be true. Check the other side because it can also be true. If I check the other side, I've got 1. And I've got 9 times 1 minus 8 over 4 times 1 squared plus 25 is less than 0. 9 times 1 is 9, minus 8 makes it a 1. So that's a 1 over. 1 squared is 1, times 4 is 4, plus 25 makes it 29. And is 1 over 29, is that less than 0? No, that would be false. But again, always check because they can both be true, or they can both be false, or they can switch back and forth. What would my solution now look like? We want the true side. So my true side is over here. And that goes back to negative infinity. So what does that look like in interval notation? Well, it looks like negative infinity to 8/9 with parentheses. And why does it have parentheses? It has parentheses because it is less than. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up now several of the applications from your homework. I gave you 4 of them. I'll probably try and set up, if we have time, set up 3 of them. So let's look at our homework now, and let's begin by looking at question 4 in your homework. I'm not going to work it completely out, but we're going to talk about how I came up with the inequality. So this now is in your homework. And this is 1.7, and we're going to look at question 4. I am going to leave 5 for you to set up on your own. So I'm going to do 4, 6, and 7. I'm not going to solve them out, but I am going to set up our inequality. And we're going to talk about how I came up with our inequality. So question 4, we're looking at a company. We're going to produce some items, and we've got a cost, and we've got a revenue. And it says determine the number of units to be sold in order to generate a profit. Now, if we run a company, what do we have? We have revenue and we have cost, right? And the revenue minus the cost gives you the profit. In most cases, you want to make as many items as possible, right? Because the more items you make, the more money you would make. But in some cases, it may not be beneficial for you to start making more items. Because in some cases, if you make more items, that may require you to build a bigger factory, employ more people, and it may just not be cost effective. So we're now going to look at question 4. We're going to talk about the cost and the revenue. And we want to make sure we make a profit. So we've got our cost here. And we've got our revenue here. Now these are non-linear, so they're going to be curves. They're going to be curves. And we want to determine the number of units to be sold in order to generate a profit. How do we define profit? Well, profit is the cost, or sorry, revenue minus the cost. Let's put the correct order here. So that's what our profit is defined to be. Profit is defined to be the revenue minus the cost. Now, what do we want? Well, we want to make a profit. If I want to make a profit, what does that mean? That means my profit has to be greater than 0, right? We want to make sure we make money. Profit, again, is defined as the revenue minus the cost. So what is my revenue? And that's R minus C. So that's your profit. Well, my revenue is 4t squared plus t. And we're going to subtract off the cost. Now make sure you use parentheses when you subtract off that cost. And that's 3t squared plus 5t. And we, again, want to make sure that we make a profit. So we've got to make sure that's going to be greater than 0. So revenue minus the cost gives you the profit. Notice how I used parentheses. Very, very important that you use the parentheses with that negative, because that negative is going to be distributed through. So let's rewrite it. I'll clean this up. I'll do a couple more steps, and then I'll let you finish the inequality out on your own. So that's what we've got there. Make sure you've got everything copied down correctly. It all looks right here. Revenue minus the cost gives you the profit. So combine like terms. And what do we have? We have t squared. And then we have a t and a minus 5t. That makes it a minus 4t is greater than 0. So that's what we've got. I think you can finish it from there. Now, when we put this on a number line, we're going to have to factor it out, of course. And when we put this out on the number line, there's going to be some regions that aren't going to work. And obviously, we know that we can't have a negative profit. So we have to, or negative units sold. So we have to be careful about that. And also, when we look at this and we think about profits, if we don't make very many units, we don't make a profit, right? But if we start making too many units, then that might involve building a bigger factory, employing more people, and we may actually lose money. So probably what's going to happen is you're going to put this on a number line, and it's probably going to be false on the low end, false on the upper end, and true in the middle. Because if you don't make very many items, you don't make any money. If you make too many items, though, then it starts costing a lot more to make them, and you may lose money. And some businesses are like that. You know, is it really worth me to expand my company? And something like this will let you analyze that and decide, is it really worth it for me to expand the company to make these extra items? And it may or it may not be. So revenue is always your profit is always your revenue minus your cost. You want to make sure you made money. And you factor it. You distribute it through. You factor out that T. Find your two critical points. Make your regions. And also, what else do you know? T can't be negative. And that's part of the problem as well. Why can T not be negative? Because you can't make negative units. And that's not going to work. So you can't have a negative answer. If you get a region that has negative numbers and it's true, it still doesn't work because you cannot have negative units produced. So you have to make sure that your inequality matches up with the application. Same thing with time. You cannot have a negative time. I'm going to leave question 5 for you to work out on your own because 5 is going to be very similar to 6, or sorry, to 7. So let's look now at question 6. And we're going to try and sell some games. Now, if you think about it, what happens as I try to sell games? Okay, if I lower the price, what happens to the number of games that I sell? I'm cheaper than everyone else, so I sell more games, right? Now, I have a fixed price that I buy them for. If I lower my cost or my price too much, then what happens? Then I don't make much money at all. So you want to have this kind of happy medium. So you still make money and you still sell games. If you raise the price too high, you don't sell many games, you don't make any money. If you set the price too low, you don't make much money off of each game, even though you sell a lot of games. So the same concept here. Now, they relate to each other. So the number of price is directly linked to the number of games that I sell. A retailer knows that N games can be sold in a month if the price is 20 minus 0.2 N dollars per game. If the retailer buys each game for $4 and he wants to make a profit of at least $300 per month on sales, how many games must he sell? So again, this goes back to our profit. And the profit, again, is the revenue minus the cost. And what do we want? Well, we want, in this case, we want to make at least $300. So we want to make at least $300. So that means my profit now must be greater than or equal to 300. So that's what I want. I want my profit to be greater than or equal to 300. Question 4, they gave you the revenue and the cost. On question 6, we're going to have to come up with those. So let's start with our cost. The cost is the easy part. Now, N is going to represent the number of games. My cost. How much does it cost me to buy a game? Well, it cost me $4 per game. So my cost would be 4N. So if I bought 10 games, it would cost me $40 for that inventory, right? So 4N then. The revenue is a little bit more complicated. How do I look at the revenue? Well, the revenue is going to be the price that I sell them for times the number of games that I sold. So for example, if I have 10 games and I sell them at $6 a piece, then I made $60 in revenue, right? Price times the number of games. So that's how it's kind of tricky here. Now, what else do we know about the number of games that I sell? Well, I know the number of games that I sell is depending upon the price. So the lower the price, the more games I sell. So how do we determine the price? Well, the price is this. The price is 20 minus 0.2 N. So that is your price. Now we still have to multiply that price by N because N is the number of games that I sell. And again, as I decrease the price, the number of games that I sell goes up. If I lower that price too much though, then I don't make any money because my margins are getting smaller. But if I raise it too high, then I don't sell very many games and I don't make money either. So let's now look at our profit. So our profit is our revenue minus the cost. And we've got our revenue, and I'll just put the N in front. Our revenue is N times 20 minus 0.2N minus our cost, which is 4N, and we want that to be greater than or equal to what? Greater than or equal to 300. I'll do one more step, and then you can finish it from here. So I'm going to go ahead now and distribute that N through and clean it up a bit. So that's going to make that then 20N minus 0.2 N squared minus 4N is greater than or equal to 300. Rewriting, we've got a minus 4N. Well, we'll rewrite this in the correct order. We've got a minus 0.2N squared. 20N minus 4N makes it 16N is greater than or equal to 300. I'm going to leave this for you to finish. Now, what would you do? Well, you need to set that equal to 0, right, and solve it. And if you want to, you can clear the fractions out, or sorry, the decimals out by multiplying everything by 10. You can either work with the decimals or you can clear them out. That's going to give you 3 different regions. Now, where do we think it's going to be true at? If we use some common sense and we think about what we're looking at here, it should be true right in the middle. Why? Because if I lower my price, I don't make any money. So it's going to be false over here if I try to sell too many games. And if I have my price too high, I don't sell enough games to make that $300 profit. So it's going to be false. So you'll get your number line, you put your numbers in there. It should be true in the middle. That's what we think it should be. And you can verify that by working it out. So you've got to find your critical points and you've got to find out where they fall on that number line. And it's probably going to be true in the middle. But work it out and make sure. Question 7 is the last one that I'm going to set up for you. Again, I'm going to leave 5 for you to do on your own. So we're going to look at 7. And I'm going to draw a diagram on 7. so you can see what it looks like. A flare is fired from the bottom of the gorge. It's visible only when that flare is above the rim. If it is fired from initial velocity of 144 feet per second and the gorge is 288 feet deep, during what interval can the flare be seen? Well, let's draw a diagram first. So I'm on top of this cliff here, and down below in the valley is a flare. So here's the flare. I'm going to fire the flare up, and it's going to come down. This right here is 0, because that's ground level, so that's 0. And here I am here. Now, where can I see the flare at? When the flare starts, I can't see it. Why not? Because it's below ground, right? If I'm standing here and it's below me, I can't see it. So I can't see it until it crosses that dotted line. So once it crosses that dotted line, I should be able to see it. Now, if we think about how the regions will work, I can't see it at the beginning. I should be able to see it in the middle. And then once it hits the ground, I'm not going to be able to see it anymore. So it should look like that. It should be false, true, false for your regions. Now let's set up our equation and get the inequality. So what's my equation here? Well, the height h is minus 16 t squared plus v naught t plus h naught. Now, v naught is the starting speed or velocity. And if I read this question, how much force do I have when I fire this flare? Okay, starting velocity, v naught is 144, because that's the speed of that flare. H naught. Well, H naught is where I start at. And this is right where I start at. This is H naught. And I am starting down 288 feet. So it's below me 288. So that H naught is going to be a minus 288. Why is it minus? Because you're below ground, right? You're below where I'm at. While you're writing this down, what does that minus 16 represent? Well, if we throw something up in the air, what happens to it? It comes back down eventually, right? What forces it to come back down? Gravity. So that minus 16, just for your future reference, if you take a physical science or a physics course, that minus 16, that represents the effects of gravity. So let's now go ahead and write up our inequality. So what does it look like? It looks like minus 16 t squared plus 144t minus 288. And we want this height to be greater than 0. Because as long as it's greater than 0, I'm going to be able to see it. Once it hits the ground, that flare is not going anywhere and I can't see it. When you start, I'm not going to be able to see it either because it's below ground. So it has to come up at 288 feet, then I can see it. And then when it hits the ground, I can't see it anymore because it's stopped. So what you're going to have to do then is finish it from here. So you've got your inequality set up, and it should come out to be false, true, and false. So you should be able to now finish that. Question 5 is definitely the easiest one to set up. So that's why I left question 5 for you to work through on your own. What's your homework? Well, your homework now is 1.7, and you should be able to do them all. We'll go over some more of them next week. Right, so next week we'll come into class, we'll go over things. That following week is spring break. So we got next week we'll have class, then spring break, and then we'll come back and take our exam. Also, I do have your homework